whilst grazing cattle on this tropical grass, as we've pointed out how important it is to maximise the use of it, we really do need to know quite objectively how our cattle are gaining weight. It's very important that the economics of this are optimising getting as much weight gain as possible. If the slower they're gaining weight, the more we're spending on maintenance every day without getting a return. And really, they might look good. As I've said many times to people, we can have a lovely paddock of feed and a lot of fat, shiny cattle, but they're losing money. So some way we can either bring them in, weigh them monthly, if that's convenient. We've had a bit of luck with, or a bit of good measurements with the OptiWeigh system, just out in the paddock. We can get weight gain pretty quickly and accurately. That helps. And at some stage we need to confirm that expected weight gain. Whatever it is, we need to know that our cattle are in the ballpark for that. And if they're not, we have to question ourselves about our grazing management, and we'll talk about that. And if our grazing management is good, we can think about the other things that might be letting us down, that we just need to cover off on too. So I think one thing we've learned also, and I suppose it might seem simple, is that never look over a fence at a pasture and assessment, because inevitably you will see the higher bits. We have to walk into a pasture and look and focus down. Walk across it, not just one area, but across and looking down. That's how you get an idea of whether 50% of the paddock is like it or 20%, and a true idea of what is there. Remember, we want maximum leaf intake whenever the cattle are grazing. And just keep that in the back of your mind, and if you see where that's not there in the pasture, that's when you move the cattle. And then reset the pasture. You're not wasting it, you're keeping that engine room of fodder production going. Yeah, look, we've seen a good entry level for pasture, about 2,500 kilos a hectare, and we've got in a pasture now where cattle are maybe towards the end of that time. And one thing we do notice is quite a bit of variation in what's here. Some low levels, if you like, some higher stemmy levels. And this is where an awareness of cattle grazing techniques is important, because one can be tempted to think that if we leave the cattle here for another day or two, there's a lot of higher bits, leafier bits, and with stem on them, that really is feed there to be grazed. With cattle, if you remember, cattle, they seek out leaf and access to leaf. And so our cattle will not do as we would wish they would. What they tend to do is come back to the shorter areas, which are sweeter. What we find too is that where we have these quite long stem, that physically and palatability wise deters cattle from eating that. So they will go to quite long lengths, days in fact, before they might engage and eat that, whereas they'll graze a lower area more. Now this is not good for them or for the pasture. They're gaining less weight by just wasting time, not eating, and our pastures are getting overgrazed in some areas and left to grow rank in others. So where the cattle have already grazed, not surprisingly, it's still pretty soft. There's a bit of stem there, and we're already, even in a day or two, we're getting a little bit of leaf regrowth from there. Right beside it, we've got stem. And coming over here, I've got some quite rigid, prickly stems. And you think cattle have got tough mouths, which they have, but they inevitably are far less likely and eat far less of that. If we want to promote weight gain and not slow it down, these cattle will come out probably within a day. There will still be quite a bit of stem and higher bits. That ideally should be reset to 10, 15 centimetres. I worry at this stage it probably would leave a little bit too much residue. It may not leave too much residue behind. Anything more than this, you really have to bale it and get it off. It just leaves too much litter behind, which then suppresses the pasture again. That's why good initial pasture management, a nice leafy pasture to go into, and quick grazing, and then that gives you the best chance. If you do have to reset it, you can just quickly knock off the few stems that are there. Well, look, occasionally paddocks inevitably do get away, and there's one here where I can't estimate, but it's probably at 5, 6, maybe 7 tonnes, I don't know, but these stems are pretty high, and the cattle have come in and trampled a lot of it. They've spent a lot of time getting what leaf they could, but even though it's high, there's not very much leaf there, and they have to work hard to get it 1 or 2 leaves at a time. They trample a lot in doing that, and so we end up with a degraded pasture, which is going to take a long time to recover. A lot of litter is left on the ground, which becomes a bit of a nitrogen sink and grows fungus in the summer, and the cattle are not gaining weight. So it's something we try and avoid. So line up, if it's getting away more than 3,000, 3,500 kilos, don't be tempted to put the cattle in. Line up a hay baler for the next week. Yeah, given that we're confident about our plant nutrition and our grazing management, there's a few cattle issues that we need to be aware of. Obviously we're grazing at very, very high stocking rates, 10, 11, 12 cattle to the hectare. That's a lot of DSEs. So, not surprisingly, gastrointestinal parasitism, worms, can be a problem. We find we can manage it we just need to fecal egg count to make sure it's okay. A drench going on, if you like, with an effective drench or combination of drenches, and then possibly presuming it's nice and low egg counts, maybe a monthly monitor just to make sure worms are not a problem. There's 2 worms, one's the scoureworm Cuperia, and obviously Barber's poleworm Haemonchus. We found Cuperia is potentially the biggest problem, but it hasn't been a big drama to date, but it's something we do need to manage. Trace elements, regardless of original levels in the soil, the fact that we're taking so much grass off a hectare of ground, pretty soon within 6 months or a year, there's a number of trace elements that we don't have to add for pastures, but they are necessary for cattle. The 2 I'm thinking of in particular are selenium and cobalt, and also copper levels that are sufficient for grasses are probably not sufficient for rapidly growing cattle, so we might have to add copper too. So those 3 elements, we just need to add those in some way. We can do them with long-acting injections, minerals in the water. Fertiliser's a bit expensive, so yeah, just blood test if you like, but you will need to think about trace element addition. Summertime, buffalo fly can deter animals from grazing and lower growth rate, so keep an eye out for that. Back rubbers, insecticidal ear tags, all those things might be needed, but depending on where you are, buffalo flies can be an issue. I think one issue that we're probably going to be aware of, but don't forget water quality. We're pretty lucky here at Pardoo because our artesian water is quite low in total soluble salts. It's fine for cattle. It actually supplies a few things that are quite useful for pastures, but I think wherever you are, everyone's got a different basis for their water supply, so just check up on that it's fine for cattle. In our experience, Wagyu cattle are perhaps a little bit more susceptible to potentially to parasitism and parasites because of the genetics compared with a Bos indicus derived animal, but all cattle are susceptible.